Actually, it's still likely. Actually, plausible, probable.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So alhamdulillah, today we are continuing with Sūrah al-Ḥashr and we listen to the Tafsīr. If we go back to Surah al-Mujadilah, right, we saw Surah al-Mujadilah ending with this concept of two parties. Right? So towards the end, we saw أُولَٰئِكَ حِزْبُ اللَّهِ أَلَا إِنَّ حِزْبَ اللَّهِ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. There's one party that is the party of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they are the successful. And then we had before that أُولَٰئِكَ حِزْبُ الشَّيْطَانِ أَلَا إِنَّ حِزْبَ الشَّيْطَانِ هُمُ الْخَاسِرُونَ, that the party of shaitan, they are the losers. Right? So Shaykh Amin puts a lot of focus on the themes that are present in the surah, and he also spoke about how there's a consistent theme in the juz itself. Right? So we see this theme repeating, and I believe one time I had asked this as a question as well, right? And inshallah everyone remembers. We said that we had said that he had identified that what is the theme of the juz, right? So the theme of the juz was the theme of the juz was bringing things together, right? Jama', that's what he had called it, jama', right? To bring things together. Okay? And as he pointed out today, we see that very clearly in today's session of Tafsīr. Right? And we once again see this concept of the groups that we saw at the end of Mujadilah, right? Of Surah Mujadilah. So today when we talk towards the end, very end of the Tafsīr, كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ كْفُرْ. Just like the example of the hypocrites and the Yahud is like the example of Shaitan when he told a human being to disbelieve, right? And then Shaykh Amin clarified that the human being over here refers to a certain monk, right, or a rabbi, and other tafasir have mentioned that it was referring to Quraysh, that was at the time of Badr, so on and so forth. Right? But the point over here is that was the group of Shaitan. Okay, so throughout the surah we see different gatherings. So last week we saw the coming together of the believers. You had the coming together of the Muhajirun and the Ansar. Right? So you had the coming together of the Muhajirun, right? You had the coming together of the Ansar, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala attached to them the believers that are going to come after them. Right? So you have Al-Muhajirin, Al-Ansar, وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ radiyallahu anhum. Okay? So these three groups are gathered. Allah brings them together. يَحْشُرُهُمْ. He brings them together under His ridwan, under His pleasure. Right? So this is mentioned in the 11th juz, right? This ayah, right? وَالسَّابِقُونَ الْأَوَّلُونَ مِنَ الْمُهَاجِرِينَ وَالْأَنصَارِ وَالَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. So over there, it's much more brief. The details aren't given. Over here in Surah al-Ḥashr, we see there was a description of the Muhajirun, there was a description of the Ansar, and there was a description of the الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ, what each one of them does. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gathers them under one umbrella. Okay, now what's to be noticed over here is that anytime Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gathers, right, when He's gathering His party and He's putting them under one group, and then there are the disbelievers who are being gathered and they're put into one group, that from the Takwini side, yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Hashir. He's the one who groups them together. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also highlights what are the qualities which attracts this gathering. Right? What is it that attracts from the takwini system for the believers to be gathered? Right? So when we go to the muhajirun, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described them as ulaika humus sadiqun. Right? And each one of these attributes, you're going to see a juxtaposition, right? You're going to see in literature, you call it a foil, right? So you'll have like a protagonist, and then you have an antagonist. To highlight the features and the characteristics of the protagonist, you often authors they insert an antagonist, or they insert a character or personality in the novel or in the story, not for the purpose of building that character, but more for highlighting the other character, right? So what we see over here is this, right? I'm not saying that this is the same concept as fall, but what I'm saying is when you put the two parties together, you really see that each one of their attributes becomes more accentuated. Okay, so where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines, right, the people, or where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala defines the muhajirun as as-sadiqun, right? They are the people who are truthful. Okay, so now to understand what is as-sadiqun, right, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Imam an-Nawawi rahimahullah, he gives a beautiful definition. He says that as-sadiqun are istiwa'u sirri wal-alan. Istiwa'u sirri wal-alan, that a person's internal and external are the same. Right? So now very clearly you see this juxtaposition with who? The munafiqun. Right? So the muhajirun, they were truthful. Right? In their hearts, they said that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Externally, they were true to it because they gave up their dunya by making the hijrah. Right? On the opposite hand, you have the munafiqun. You see the exact opposite. They give up akhirah for dunya. Right? So they tell their brethren from the Yahud, right, we're going to help you. Right? This is their ideal. Right? We're going to help you. And then when push comes to shove, obviously that's going to mean them losing lives. So did they help them? They didn't help them. Right? So where the muhajirun put their actions where their mouths were, right, the munafiqun did the exact opposite. Okay? Right? Then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the Ansar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَن يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ, right? The one who is saved from the stinginess of themselves. Right? You see the exact opposite on the other side. You see greed. Right? Okay. And then so we talked about the attributes of the muhajirun. We spoke about the attributes of the Ansar. And now we have which group left? الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوهُمْ بِإِحْسَانٍ. Those that followed them with excellence. Right? Where in Sūrah al-Ḥashr it says وَالَّذِينَ جَاءُوا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ. Those that came after the muhajirun and the Ansar. Okay? What do? They don't have any animosity in their hearts. Right? They actually love the muhajirun and the Ansar and those that came before them, and they love those that are going to come after them. So the believers, they have this pure heart, right? And they love each other. Whereas when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the munafiqun, He says, بَأْسُهُمْ بَيْنَهُمْ شَدِيد, right? That the animosity amongst them is severe. Right? So at each level, you have a complete opposite. Right? They're just completely it's like they stand starkly. Right? And that's why they make up these two groups. Right? So Allah yahshur, He gathers them. Those that have these qualities of being truthful, of being generous, of having pure hearts, Allah gathers them into one entity. Right? And those whose qualities are not being sincere, right, not being truthful, right, being greedy and having animosity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gathers them into, right, one group. Okay, the point I'm mentioning this, or the point in mentioning this, is that we've been talking about attracting the madad and attracting the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the nizam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Hashir, right? He's the one who groups people together. So when we talk about we want Muslim unity and we want to be together, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us the system that has to be implemented here to bring that, right? And that system is you need the attribute of truthfulness, you have generosity.
The camera is off, John.
It's not working.
Okay.
Yeah. So you have to have the attribute of generosity. You have to have the attribute of being pure of heart. Right? When you have these, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brings together. Okay. Now, when we go over to the other side and you identify, okay, what's causing them to be, fragmented and splintered, right? One of the things that Shaykh Amin that was very beautiful that he mentioned, وَذَلِكَ بِأَنَّهُمْ قَوْمٌ لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. They are people that don't have fiqh, right? Okay, لَا يَفْقَهُونَ. They don't have fiqh, right? They don't understand, okay? And what he did was he gave a definition of fiqh, right? And the definition is actually taken from Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, and I'm sure other scholars have mentioned it too. But Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah, he mentions specifically, he says, أدنى درجة الفقه, right? The lowest level of fiqh is أن تعلم أن الآخرة خير من الدنيا. That you have to know that the akhirah is better than the dunya. That's the lowest level of fiqh, right? So what the munafiqun didn't have was this, right? Because remember, they were greedy, right? They're like, okay, well, we're not going to do that. Right? Why should we give up our lives? When it stood for our benefit, when we had benefit in saying we're with you, and we said we're with you, and when we were going to lose lives, like we're not going to lose lives, right? Why? So that's their fiqh, right? Their fiqh is restricted to this dunya, right? The believer has fiqh because he realizes that akhirah is better, right? So now when we look at the state of the ummah today, it's like, well, why are we fragmented? Because there's no fiqh, right? Because everyone that's in power wants the dunya, they don't want the akhirah. They haven't understood that the akhirah is better than the dunya, right? So we're not implementing the system, therefore we're not attracting the madad, right? We're not attracting the nusra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, right? Now, another very important thing that Sheikh Amin spent considerable time discussing was also connected to this idea of how do you attract the help of Allah from his system, right? From the takwini system, right? He actually explicitly stated that today. He spoke about the takwini system. Right? And one of those very important things that he mentioned was that a believer attracts the madad from the takwini system through his iman, right? Through his faith, right? And his reliance upon that system, not on the external means. Not that he doesn't use the external means, but his reliance is on that iman, on that to take from that system. And what he was mentioning was that human vehicle, right? That human vehicle of attracting the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that human vehicle is enough to spread Islam, right? That you don't need. In fact, he went on to say that anything that is outside of the human vehicle does not have the capability of attracting Allah's mercy, right? And that's where he went into this discussion of what does Ahlul Kitab mean, right? So in the narrations, we will actually find that there's narrations that mentions about this ummah, anajiluhum fi sudurihim la yughsal bil ma, right? So the word that's used there is anajil, right? Anajil, as we know from Injil, right? Their Injil, right, meaning the anajil, mean their scrolls are fi sudurihim, are in their chest, la yughsal bil ma, that cannot be washed out with water. Okay, why am I mentioning this? The reason I'm mentioning this is that when we talk about this human vehicle, right, A book is something that is external to the human being. A pen is something that's external to the human being. A piece of paper, parchment, modern tools of education, all of that is external to the human being. It doesn't mean that we don't use them, right? We can use them. What we're saying is what's going to bring the barakah, right, and what's going to bring the nusra is the human being. And that's why we have the oral tradition, right? How did the Prophet ﷺ present Islam to people, right? It was through the oral tradition, okay? So when we speak about, we have to understand, we have to have fiqh, we have to have ilm, we have to understand what the Quran is saying so that we can attract the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We cannot adopt the methodology of the Ahlul Kitab. And that's what Shaykh Amin was saying, that the use of Ahlul Kitab is ironic, right? Because you have a book and you're still not getting the rahmah of Allah, right? You have all the means, but because you don't have the internal human vehicle, right, which is the seat of Iman, you're not able to attract the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And that's where Shaykh Amin went on to say that if a person just picks up the Mus'haf or picks up a translation, is like, I'm going to understand Quran from the Quran, that's a very Ahlul Kitab mentality, right? Because you're now divorcing that from the human tradition. You're divorcing that from the oral tradition, right? So when we want to attract the mercy of Allah through the understanding and through the learning of the Quran, we can't adopt the methodology of the Ahlul Kitab, right? We have to keep that human element there, okay? So that was one thing that he had mentioned about attracting the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the focus has to remain on the human element, because it's the human element that receives from that other system, okay? And then the next element that he mentioned was under the discussion of كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ كْفُرْ, right? Where he gave like the example of shaitan when he told, the human being over here, the human being, perhaps referring to a rabbi or a monk, to disbelieve, right? And there was the story that's mentioned by Ibn Kathir rahimahullah and others, that it was about the monk who shaitan seduced by introducing a young woman to seduce him, right? And many of us know the story. We don't have time to go through the whole story, right? What's important is that at every step, as shaitan got the monk to, what's the word I can use here, concede, right? To concede. Here's one compromise, another compromise, third compromise, right? Eventually what happens, right? We all know what happens, right? He falls into something haram. If you actually go and read the riwayat, right? And it's also, if anyone's interested, you can find it in Talbis of Iblis, right? Talbis of Iblis, right? So the narration is mentioned in detail, right? What's really interesting, just to add and shed light to it, and every time he conceded, he had a reason that he gave himself. He had a justification, right? So I'm doing it, the first time when he went, maybe I should just go check on her, right? It's the right human thing to do. I should check on her, right? So, okay, this was the first experience. Second one, it's like, she's away from her family. There's no one there. She's probably bored, I can just go talk to her, right? At every point, there was something that in his mind, he was shaitan, right? Shaitan was there justifying to him that this is why, right? Okay. And, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserve Shaykh Amin with how outright he says things, mashallah, right? So, he's speaking about, and then he connects that to, let's just remember the things he said. He says, I'm okay with demonstrating, right? I'm okay with protest. I'm okay with the goals of the protest. He did say all of that, right? What was he saying is that now if on the way to the protest, now sins are occurring, right? At the place of the protest, right? Now you're mingling with sin, right? Things are happening there that are not supposed to happen, okay? what was Shaykh Amin trying to say is that if you're trying to attract the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it doesn't come that way, because that's what happened with كَمَثَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ إِذْ قَالَ لِلْإِنسَانِ كْفُرْ. Right? Every time the help of Allah does not come unless you're protected by the Sharia. Right? Now, that was the point that he was trying to get across. Okay, and I think that's very important, because often we see spectrums in the community, right? And that's what he was talking about. Is like, for political expediency, sometimes we're ready to make compromises, right? Okay, so what he's saying is, like, even when you make these compromises, perhaps you will see some results, right? You will see some results, right? That doesn't mean that's the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming, right? That he said that doesn't equate to the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, okay? Because the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only comes through Sharia, okay? What does that mean? That means is that we should have people that are there that can organize for these things to occur without these compromises being made, right? Where the orders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not being broken, right? So that infrastructure should be created where Muslims can voice their opinions, right? Where they are not bound by other people, right? That, so, well, this is how we're going to do it, right? Muslims should be able to have their own, where they dictate the terms of this is how it's going to happen, right? Where you don't have the intermingling, where you have people praying on salah, right? Where there is no haram that is occurring, right? So this is how, when we structure it that way, now you attract the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. So that puts it at, we have some time, inshallah. I'll end there, and inshallah we can take questions or discussions, inshallah.
There's one question here in the chat, I think.
Yeah.
This is, when the shaitan misguides and states, I am not part of the sinner, is that sinner doomed in the sense that they will not be able to do tawbah?
Okay. Yeah. So no. So when the shaitan says "Inni bari'un minka," that I am free from you, right? It doesn't mean that the doors of tawbah are closed on that person. What shaitan is saying is that I got you to do what I wanted to do, and I promised you that I'm going to help you, right? So that's why I had mentioned that one of the tafsir was also that, this was referring to when shaitan was, he got the people of Quraysh to commit to Badr, right? So they were expecting to see that help, right? He came to them, right, in some places in the form of human beings, said, okay, I'm going to help you, right? But then that help didn't come. And in other places as well, right? In the story of the monk, at every time, the monk, he's like, okay, well, this is getting bad, right? Okay, what should I do? So on and so forth. Every time shaitan would offer the solution, right? And at the end of that narration, what happens is that the people, they come and they tell him, like, long story short, he ends up killing the girl, right? Burying her. They find out where she is. They found out what happened, and they put him on the noose, basically, right? And the shaitan comes to him. It's like, well, I got you here. I'm the one who's going to get you out, right? So go ahead and do shirk, right? So then he does shirk, and then he's like, yeah, I'm not going to help you, right? So that's what's meant by, I'm free from you, right? Every point up until the last point, till he died, right? He had the option of making tawbah, right? So that doesn't mean that the door of tawbah is closed. What it does highlight is the theme of the surah, right? The theme of the surah is what unites and what disunites, right? So shaitan is all about breaking up, right? Shaitan tells you, I'm with you, and then when you need him, then he leaves you, right? He doesn't stay connected with you, right? He disunites. Okay. Yeah.
With regards to that definition of fiqh that you shared, which essentially is interesting, because I thought you were going to go somewhere very, very different. That Quran and Sunnah, or the Maqasid al-Sharia or something like that. But that definition is a very interesting one. Is basically recognizing that what comes after is better than what comes before, or that next life is better than this life. Is that sort of the foundational element of all fiqh, or is that the distillation of all of fiqh into the most concise form?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we can say there's a fiqh, that there's definition of fiqh in terms of terminology, right? When you're talking about it as a science that's been codified and formalized now. Right? There's a linguistic definition, right? And then there's the meaning of fiqh that you find in Quran and Sunnah, right? So this definition of fiqh is the spirit of fiqh that the Quran and Sunnah speak about.
Gotcha.
Right? So when you look at how is the word fiqh utilized in the Quran and Sunnah, then this is the Quranic usage of fiqh. Right? This is what it's talking about. Right? There's one more interesting point that I remembered, was that in terms of attracting the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one thing that Shaykh Amin was mentioning was that help came in the form of intelligence, right? Intelligence of the inner psyche of the hypocrites, right? Meaning there's no way to know that they are, amongst themselves, they're actually not united, right? So if you look at a munafiq externally shows something and internally has something else, right? So you see that same theme repeated in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informing the believers, تَحْسَبُهُمْ جَمِيعًا, you think that they're all together, وَقُلُوبُهُمْ شَتَّى, but their hearts are fragmented, right? They're separated, okay? So first you have that beautiful, kind of like mirroring effect of what is nifaq, right? So they have nifaq in their hearts and they externally expose something. And then even at their communal level, right? As a community, right? If you can call munafiqeen a community, right? They are externally, they're together, but then internally they're divided, right? And what was very subtle is that Shaykh Amin was telling us that how is this a help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you their weakness, right? So like when you're fighting the enemy, you want to know their weakness. So, this is a point that is like a political strength, that how should you wield this intelligence? You should wield it by exploiting the differences amongst them, right? Because they may seem that they're together, but they're always fragmented, right? So that was the form of the madad and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming in the form of intelligence, right? So what we would basically call today, like, every state has its intelligence, right? So the believer's state, right, or the Muslim, right, through the ibadah and iman, they get intelligence from the ghaib, right? They're able to attract that level of intelligence.
Yeah. Right? I think one of the other interesting observations is just a comment. Sometimes this notion of like the human being the vehicle of Allah, essentially, like, His mercy comes through the human element. The tools are just tools.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we conflate, like, and in fact, it's even applied to us, where we feel like, oh, we've made it, we've been able to, quote unquote, pull ourselves up from our bootstraps. Or Allah has helped us to do that, even if we have that level of recognition. But then we'll look at somebody else who is sick or not, doesn't have means or something like that, and we'll sort of say, well, they should just, do the same thing and figure out, right? Versus us recognizing that we could be the vehicle of answering that person's dua, for example, right? And that every one of those things is an opportunity for us to fulfill basically the commands of Allah through whatever it is that we can do to facilitate some benefit for that person. And it may not be, may or may not be in a position to do that, but every one of those instances is an opportunity, and to apply intelligence and wisdom in navigating kind of, is there an approach there? Is a part of, at least my understanding is that that's sort of a part of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects of us. And that's another way of seeing, like, not only is our action a vehicle of mercy potentially to us, but also to everybody around us that may or may not be going through different things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that understanding is definitely there. Right? Yeah. Alhamdulillah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahum bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
There's one more question. I grew up during the Bosnian genocide and realized how the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are true when it comes to Ahlul Kitab. We kept our distance, maybe also because we were outsiders.
MashaAllah. Wonderful observation, MashaAllah.